As Don mentioned, we're going to open it up for a bit of a discussion. Let me first say, the folks at the back, please come up. There are some few chairs up here, so if you're, I know when I stand after one, my back hurts, so come on up. Don't be shy. There's a few here. We've got some mics here. Happy to engage in a conversation. I have ground rules, and according to Don, there are no ground rules. He said he would take questions on anything, or we can open up the dialogue, so please don't be shy.
Well, in fact, I put that chart back up there. Should anyone want to talk about? Now, I could give a one-hour presentation on the other 15 if you're good for that. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
First one.
Just going back to the taxonomy of networks, and you were asking for some feedback. Have you considered perhaps making the distinction between communities and networks, and focusing communities in the way that you organize it by function, and analyzing networks by their form, not their function? So, in a sense, by their focal lenses. Different networks have different rules that determine how the different nodes are connected. And maybe that could be an interesting way to catalog them as well.
Would you like to write a white paper on this topic? I'm going to use that as an answer to many questions today, I think. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. I appreciate it. Very passionate about the topic as well. Spent the last 2 years devoting, actually 7 of us have been building a software platform that's trying to enable ideas on a global scale to be collaborated on. Our biggest challenge is that a lot of the things we've seen working with agencies like 100% Open or other is that the companies that are investing in putting agency in the hands of the individual are doing so on a campaign basis. So they're willing to let go of that control temporarily or for a project. It's very difficult to get a business model to shift in such a way that the organization puts that agency in the hands of their individuals on a regular basis. Are you seeing anything similar?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
So you take a Lego or a Procter & Gamble or other, and there's been some very successful campaigns that have been run, especially harnessing the power of crowds.
To change Procter & Gamble or involving Procter & Gamble?
To innovate in general.
To innovate.
To innovate.
Okay.
Goldcorp being the famous one from your
yeah,
book.
Yeah, right.
We're not seeing too many business models, though, that are shifting. We're seeing a lot of campaigns, but we're not seeing too many businesses reorient around the fact that agency around an idea needs to belong in the hands of the individual.
Well, it's a tough thing to let go for a lot of companies because we have these old modus operandi of how things work. And to turn your customers into producers, for example, as Threadless has done, it's sort of a countercultural thing. You know about Threadless? It's a clothing company, largely T-shirts, and all their customers design the T-shirts. For Doritos to do the Crash the Super Bowl contest and let their customers create the ads for the Super Bowl. For IBM to open up and rather than fighting Linux to embrace it and give away $400 million to the Linux community. This involves some really deep cultural stuff, like our intellectual property belongs to us, and we sure shouldn't be giving it away. And if someone tries to infringe it, we'll get out our lawyers and we'll sue them. And the problem, of course, is that that doesn't work anymore. It didn't work so well for the music industry. The internet was the best thing to ever happen to the industry, but they took a legal response to a business model challenge, and now the industry that brought us Elvis and the Beatles is suing people as a major source of revenue. And it's collapsing as an industry. So I'm going to let you just react again to that. I think I'm answering your question, but I'm not sure.
You are. The Linux example is the most apropos, I think. I mean, that's an organization that the model is inherently about the individuals. I think a lot of those other ones are still campaigns. They're still, it's a foray, it's an exploration on the part of the organization.
Yeah.
But it's not quite a reorientation of their business model or their organizational structure, for that matter. So that's, yeah. I'm still waiting to see that tipping point, I guess.
Yeah, it's happening, but it's slow. I mean, the Green Exchange that Nike largely initiated is a great example of that, but it hasn't been taken up by a lot of companies. And I think it's for that reason. That Nike placed 400 patents into the Green Exchange on the idea that, well, as this woman, Hannah Jones, who's the head of innovation and sustainability there, says to me, you know, if we develop a way of reducing water in production, and one of our competitors has to spend $10 million doing the very same thing, it doesn't help us a tiny bit as Nike. It'd be way better if we placed all this intellectual property and know-how about sustainability into an exchange where a rising tide would lift all boats. Seems like a totally sensible thing to do, but the take-up on that has been really slow, probably for the reasons that you described.
I want to respond to that. If you can stay by the microphone so I can get a comment back from you. The US government is now doing a digital government strategy, creating an online platform, which ideally, I guess, is going to collect all the services so you can find what you're looking for via an app on your phone. If that is slightly open source, then it allows for people to connect with those services, participate, allows for metrics, who's using what, how. I've pitched the idea of doing something like that, a shared services model for the Ontario government, perhaps for the national government as well. So if we've got ideas that are within business, and if it's something that particularly government needs to do as we're looking at crisis in healthcare, crisis in education, not enough money, but we can't afford doing less services. And there does seem to be an appetite for that. And if people don't quite feel like they can get there on their own, they need to have some sort of initiative that's pushing them forward. But you get the grassroots movements, people like the ones in this room that are on Twitter and demanding change, and everyone's kind of feeding onto that. Is there sort of a closed loop model that is forcing government business to do that collaboration piece? Because really the only way forward?
Well, if all we're doing is like eGov, which has been around for 20 years, and you're using technology to pave the cow path, you know, to take existing government's processes and structures and so on and put them onto a tablet, then that's not very helpful to me. The opportunity is to fundamentally change the architecture of government and how we get capability to create public value, as I was describing earlier.
If it's all online, sorry, just quickly, if it's all online, I can see via the internet, what have you, what hospitals there are, what usages there are, where the duplication gaps and overlaps exist. If I, as a taxpayer, am seeing all that information aggregated online, then I'm going to demand change.
Yeah.
So if you are...
Yeah, but to me that's a very different thing. I mean, that's about governments opening up their data and making that available to the world. And that's a wonderful thing to do. Because when you do that, as the British Columbia government did, people take that data and they do good stuff with it. They self-organize and they create all kinds of new value. I mean, I was in Melbourne talking to the CEO of Melbourne. They have a CEO. And I said to her, give me an example of some data that we have some policemen in the room, or we did. And they said, she said, bicycle accidents. And I said, you got data about bicycle accidents in the city of Melbourne? She said, yep. I said, release it. Raw data. Within 48 hours, someone will create a Google Maps mashup and showing where it's dangerous to go on your bike. Within a week, you'll be saving lives. It costs you nothing. And that's about how we create public value, and that's the really big change. And it has the ancillary benefits that you're talking about, too. But it's a little different than transparency. We think about freedom of information and that kind of stuff as being governments being open and transparent. I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about the release of assets, of actual data that we as citizens paid for to be created, and releasing those assets so that the four pillars can take those assets and do new things with them. And that's a powerful new opportunity that, for me, would result in much cheaper and much better government.
If I could, you wanted something from the gentleman in the back. I want to know if you want to sit down.
Turn to him quickly. What you're describing right now, is
done?
that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I was just going to say I thought Don did a great job with that.
Okay. We're going to connect.
And one more comment for those on Twitter. I want to get this right. Hashtag Tapscott at MaRS. Is that correct? Oh, I did it right. There you go. You get that? Hashtag Tapscott at MaRS.
Hello. Thank you for the talk again. So you said a lot about networked intelligence and all these different networks that are collaborating over the network, the internet. Unfortunately, the internet itself is controlled by corporations and in some places even by governments that can turn it off, with the flip of a switch. And I guess I'm wondering, what are we doing, or does something need to change about that? Does internet access need to become a human right?
Well, this is a huge battle that is underway now and will continue for the foreseeable future between the forces that would like to control the internet. They would like to have walled gardens. They'd like to make it different than, say, the roads, where you get in a car and you can drive to any place in Canada. They'd like to see an internet where you can only go to places where they can make money. And of course, there are all kinds of people who want to censor the internet or do worse things with it. The Citizen Lab up the street here, Ron Diebert, I was talking to him about this project. Citizen Lab they've got like dozens of programmers and hackers that are out there trying to find out what bad governments are doing to censor or otherwise wreck the internet in their countries. And I was telling him about this project that I'm doing. He says, it's a great project. I said, we should do a case study on the Citizen Lab. Could you assign somebody? And he said, Don, I just can't right now because we're so swamped. Let me give you an example. Before this meeting started, I just discovered on my workstation that in Syria, they've created a fake Facebook where they're using that to harvest the names of dissidents. And so they can hunt them down and kill them. And that's kind of a higher priority for me to get on and bust this fake Facebook than helping you with a case study. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I kind of see your point. But on the other hand, the horse has left the barn. The train has left the station. You have millions and millions of people now organizing into these networks and that are not just arguing for an open and free and neutral internet, but taking all kinds of action to fight for it. Now, whether you go beyond that and say that internet access is a human right is a whole other issue. And Vince Cerf, who's a collaborator on this thing and who was one of the 2 or 3 people credited with inventing the internet, has said, no, that would be a mistake. The free speech is a basic human right. The right to assemble is a basic human right. The internet is a platform enabling those very fundamental human rights to occur.
What was the UN declaration around that? The UN declaration around human?
I don't know, but I think they stopped short of saying that.
Thank you very much for your comments. It's all very interesting. I know that the definition you gave for the networks wouldn't include national political parties, but maybe you can just comment on what's the future of political parties in this world?
Well, I think political parties, and for that matter democracy, are facing a crisis of legitimacy, where, and it's reflected in many ways. I'll just give you one. It's a big topic. Young people all around the world care a lot. They increasingly sense that there are fundamental problems in the world. They have very strong values. They're participating like never before. It's not true they're a little army of narcissists that all they care about is YouTube and Facebook and so on. No, youth volunteering is up year over year for 15 years in Canada, the United States, and in many European countries. But they're not voting. Now, oh, they're lazy. No, I don't think that's the problem. I think that increasingly young people are starting to conclude that our democratic processes are not the best way to bring about change in society. And Obama's suffering from this right now. Young people really came behind him in that election campaign, and fundamentally, what kind of change was achieved? Now, I don't know if you can blame Obama or not for that, and there are a lot of really deep-seated problems in the body politic in the United States. But political parties were institutions that came out of the rise of the nation state, and we created these parties, and they were places for discussion of ideas and for debate. Well, they're not now. They're basically institutions for raising money and fielding candidates. So if you're a young person, why would you get involved in that? Now, don't get me wrong, I think it's a terrible thing. I'm a big defender of democracy, and especially representative democracy. We're not going to make that go away. This is not, you know, Ross Perot in the electronic town hall. You vote every night on the evening news, you know, AKA the electronic mob. That, you know, democracy is a lot more than majority rule on a nightly basis. One of the things it's about is protecting the rights of minorities. We need these institutions, but they're in danger of being disintermediated. They're in the middle. And you know the disintermediation idea, that if you're in the middle when transaction and collaboration costs drop, the function that you create can go away. Now there's also this other thing called reintermediation. The opportunities to create new value in the middle are greater than the old middle, but what you find is typically it's not the leaders of the old middle that create the new middle. So who are the hot travel agents in the world today? You know, they're Expedia and Travelocity and Open Table and Hotels.com and all these things that didn't exist from before. So well, you should speak to this too. Just tell us a couple of things about what you're doing. But I'm sorry, what's your first name? Christian is creating one of these new intermediaries. It's a platform for all kinds of political discussion and activity. LEAD now in Canada has hundreds of thousands of people at various ways that are involved in discussions about big issues like the omnibus bill or the crime bill. They're mainly young people. They're bigger than all the political parties in Canada combined. I bet you if you talk to a typical cabinet minister, they never would have heard of them. So we need to fix these problems, or young people will seek other ways of bringing about change in society.
Hi again, Don. How are you? I have one question, and it's changing topics a little bit. I was hoping to ask you about the future of work, right below the topic for today.
It's on the chart.
It's on the chart. In your presentation, you spoke about open innovation, transparency, the net generation, growing unrest. Wondering if you can speak to some of these trends that you're seeing and how they may change the way we work in the future.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just say a couple of things. This is a big topic. I'm happy to talk informally about it. But our institutions of work came out of the industrial age, right? And the most effective critique of these institutions, and in fact the best-selling management book of all time, but sure wasn't written by me. It wasn't even written by Peter Drucker. It was written by a guy named Scott Adams, right? It's called Dilbert. And didn't Dilbert nail it? The industrial age model of work divides the world into the governed and the governors. At the top is the supreme governor, the bottom the permanently governed, and in between those who alternate as governed and governors. Your goal is to try and move up the hierarchy, get more people reporting to you. For over a century, the Hay system meant that you got more money if you had more people reporting to you. You have all these silos, people don't collaborate across, you hoard knowledge because knowledge is the basis of power rather than sharing it. Well, this is an improvement over what existed before, but today we can have fundamentally new models of work. And we can have collaboration that can occur within an enterprise of peers cutting across the traditional silos. There are these new collaborative platforms that enable us to work very differently now. This one youngster, I was interviewing her in front of it was the World Congress on IT. It's a big audience. The World Congress on IT is being held in Canada this year, by the way, October 22nd in Montreal. But I said to her, do you use electronic mail? And she said, oh, she's 20 years old. She says, oh no, Mr. Tapscott, that's like yesterday's technology. And I said, well, if you did use email, what would you use it for? And she says, email is sort of like a formal technology, say for sending a thank you letter to one of your friend's parents. That would be a good use of email. Well, if that's what email is, how do we get beyond that to these new collaborative platforms that involve an industrial strength social network, wikis, blogs, jams, ideation tools, next generation project management. This is the new operating system for the 21st century organization, and these things are fundamentally changing the nature of work.
Hi, Don. I see you're opening the TED Global event next week in Edinburgh. I've been to about 10 TEDs, and I'm just trying to figure out what kind of territory you're going to cover in your talk there next week. And did you disclose any of that tonight in tonight's talk? So what
Stay tuned.
I can tell you what I'm going to talk about. I can't give you my speech because they might not like that. And besides, that would be 18 minutes long. Well, but the theme of TED Global is openness. And so I'm going to talk about what is openness. And that it has 4 very different meanings, and for each of them is a principle around which we can rebuild all of our institutions in the world. And the 4 meanings and corresponding principles are collaboration, the way that I've been describing it here, transparency, which is about the communication of pertinent information to stakeholders, sharing, which is not about communication of information, it's about giving up assets. And the 4th is empowerment, not in the motherhood sense, but in the sense of a real distribution and disaggregation of power out and down into our organizations and into society, of which the Arab Spring would be an example. And so that's kind of it's a talk about openness. They made it the opening thing because that's the theme of TED.
Okay, thanks.
I appreciate your passion and your humor. It's been a great hour. I'm going to zero in on one of the boxes there, healthcare, which has been in a slow-burning platform for about 30-some years, and still we're talking about the same changes that we were 30 years ago. Can you comment on the leadership imperative that we need to embrace and act on that really will make a difference?
Well, I agree with you. I think that all of the debates in healthcare, even in the United States, single payer, not, public, market, whatever, and in Canada, they're even more parochial. Which province should get more money, that kind of stuff. All of these debates are within the old paradigm of healthcare. So the industrial age was an age of mass production, mass distribution, mass marketing, mass media, mass education, where something in the center pushes out something to passive recipients. So, our education systems, based on the lecture. And we have the very best model of education that 17th century technology can provide. I'm a teacher, I have knowledge, you're a student, you don't get ready, here it comes. Well, the trouble, of course, is that today the teacher is not the main source of knowledge, and the students are reduced to being passive recipients in the learning process, and they don't learn that way. So when it comes to healthcare, we have the very same thing. I'm a clinician, I have knowledge, you're a patient, you don't, get ready, here it comes. You get healthcare when you come into the system only, which is why it costs so much. And please, don't collaborate with anyone else, and don't go on the internet, because that's full of all kinds of crappy information. So again, the industrial age model results in these huge costs and some big problems too, like the number 3 killer of Canadians is the healthcare system. Don't feel bad, it's number 2 in the United States. Through drug interactions and botched diagnosis, lack of evidence-based medicine, procedures. Hospitals is the most dangerous place in the world. You don't want to spend any time in a hospital if you can, because it's full of infections and all kinds of other problems. So how do we fix this? Well, there's a whole chapter about the proposed new model. I'll just give it to you in a couple of sentences. Every Canadian baby should get a website, and all of you should get one too. And it's half electronic healthcare record, and it's half a social network for health. And if you have a profile, of course it's confidential and secure. Your physicians and clinicians are providing the data for this thing, but you have full transparency into your own record, and you get to collaborate with others in a way that's curated. So if you have ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, a terrible disease, chances are, there's a good chance that you're on a community called Patients Like Me. 20% of all people with ALS in Canada and the United States are on Patients Like Me, and they're collaborating. And they're sharing all kinds of information. They are improving the course of their disease through collaboration. And physicians love this because, especially medical researchers, because it's generating all kinds of data and experiences and knowledge and know-how that's really important for science and for medicine. So in this new environment, I got a problem. I don't know what it is. Maybe I've got diabetes or I'm obese or something. I mean, how are we going to fix obesity? It's a huge and growing problem. By lecturing people? Isolation is the #1 risk factor in health. And the only way we're going to fix this is to completely change the paradigm in healthcare to create a collaborative platform. We could do that. We have the technology to do it. We get Accenture to put it together. Sorry. And we could move forward to an environment where we had better healthcare outcomes and where the cost was a lot less. So it is a question of leadership. It's about finding the will to make something like this happen.
If I go to the lady at the back, thank you.
Thank you. Speaking on the topic of openness and transparency, my question was just, what is your idea or what are your views on the Syria topic, where we have full transparency? We see, the images of babies with bullets in their heads and things like this, and even the UN, where they've, I think, if I'm not mistaken, what they've done is sent unarmed people in there to monitor the situation. But nothing, and we see what's going on, and we all say, no, we don't like it, but then nothing is really getting done. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a case in point of how, if you ask most people in the world who are informed about Syria, they'd say this is a completely intolerable situation, and dramatic action should be taken to fix the situation. But we have these nation states, that's the way we're organized in the world, and they can't agree. So what do? Well, people are self-organizing, and I'll just give you an example from Syria. This is from 3 months ago. If you were injured in a demonstration or something, and you say broke your leg, you went to the hospital, you came out with a bullet in your head. So these two youngsters used Twitter to create an alternative medical emergency system so that you get injured, a car picks you up and takes you to a makeshift medical clinic that has physicians and nurses and other medical people, and they attend to your medical problem as opposed to executing you. And this is now making a really huge difference in the world. Now that's within Syria, but I think that there's, we have the broadcast media that talks about this stuff, but there are many of these multi-stakeholder networks that are organizing, that are lobbying, that are trying to educate, that are advocating change. There are operational networks like that one that are going in and actually trying to solve problems. It's frustrating. It's beyond words that this situation continues. But overall, the arc of history is a positive one. And the struggle for democracy and freedom has always been really ugly and has always been full of all kinds of difficulties and revolutions and change and so on. The shift from agrarian feudal societies to nation states and industrial democracy was punctuated by revolutions all around the world. That's what the French Revolution was. A bunch of people, new classes rising up and saying, we don't want a bunch of kings running our lives. That's what the American Revolution was. We had a milquetoast version of that in Canada. We still kept the monarchy. But all across Latin America, you had the national democratic revolutions and the same kind of thing. So, this is not going to be easy, but overall, I'm hopeful. I know that's not a very satisfying answer.
So we're down to the last 2 men standing. Okay. So, gentleman number 1.
Back to actually changing topics a little bit, and I'd love a chance to talk about democracy at the end, for sure. But talking about the economy for a second, and you mentioned before obesity. I don't think obesity is a health problem. I think it's an economic problem, an economic that results from the choices that we have, and the ones that we really can make, and the ones that are just not economically viable for a great majority of the population, particularly in the U.S. to what extent do you think that these changing forces of technology and networks and collaboration, openness, and so on and so forth, will be able to change the rules by which capital works? Right now we have the shareholder-centric system dominating the corporation, which is the entity that represents economic motion. But that system is fundamentally not cannibalistic, it is predatory, and it will not ever care about social improvement because that is not its mandate. We need to find a way in which we can use capital in a way that is not just looking for the maximization of return on investment, but the maximization of customer experience and just social improvement as a whole. Do you think have you seen any, I know this is, I don't have an answer, but have you seen any stabs at that problem, at finding new ways to rearrange capital for productive modes?
Well, you might say that, okay, let's see, we've got social media and social innovation and social government, and we've got social platforms. What do we call the next economic system? Well, how about socialism? Nope, that one's been taken. That one's not going to work. And I'm with you in spirit, but I'm not sure I agree. So here's the thing. And we're going to have to end this. We can take it offline. But there was this expression for many years amongst corporate social responsibility types that you do well by doing good. And the idea was that you should be a good company because that's how you are successful and profitable. I think it wasn't true. That lots of companies did well by being really bad, by externalizing their costs onto society, or by having terrible labor practices in the developing world, or by being monopolies, or by putting all their money into marketing rather than to innovation. But increasingly, because of transparency, because of all this stuff, I think it's becoming true that companies are having to change their behavior, and it's not because they're being told by governments, although governments reflect a lot of public sentiment. They're having to do it because they can't build trust in this new network world unless they have integrity as part of their bones. And so I'm going to just end with a story. Actually, I'm going to save the story on that. Let's just get the last question here, and then I'll end with the story because it's a good way to...
Yeah, my comment or question is somewhat related to yours. It's, when you're sort of evolving towards the disaggregation of power and devolution of intellectual property, it's almost an impossibility for our existing corporate structures to continue to exist. And I'm pointing my question more to the suits at Accenture. How are you dealing with this internally? Are you willing to oversee the destruction of your own organization and the sort of the flirtation of, scattering your capital to the wind, so to speak, to re-merge with a new format, a new structure for functioning in society? I mean,
sure. So let me give you an example. So Accenture is about 250,000 odd people around the globe. Guess what? They get to vote every day with their feet. We work in a very competitive market. There's lots of choices for them. One of the things that we've originated is called Skills to Succeed. Our goal is to equip 250,000 people around the world with a job, ability to create a business, skills to succeed through government agencies that are not-for-profit. The reason that's there is because the people of Accenture want that. They embrace it. It's about transparency. It's about collaboration. So that's the kind of things that we do, because if we didn't, those people would vote to go somewhere else. It's as simple as that. We're about retaining, attracting, and holding on to that talent. And without those kinds of programs, you will fail.
But it's failure to make profits is your definition of success too, though, because without those profits, the entity can't continue to exist either.
That is the system we live in today.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So as that system begins to disintegrate, and I'm not so objective, I don't take objection to the word socialism. I think transparent socialism is really what we need, and that can evolve in this kind of a format as well. So as we move forward in this new climate, then you're going to get the destruction of these old structures, and because our whole legal system and everything else is kind of built around it, something's got to move in to replace it eventually. And I'm just wondering how even progressive organizations like yours can actually facilitate.
We are part of society, right? So it's not up to any individual. It's to the 4 pillar states you talked about. So we're a participant in that, and I think that we have to you know, we have to make judgment calls along the way. It's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day, but we're going to evolve and change, and we'll continue to do that.
Let me just, first of all, let me confess that this is the bottom of a suit. I am a suit too, I confess. And I actually run a think tank that's a for-profit think tank. I don't think the markets are necessarily bad, or even the idea of the corporation is a bad idea. I think it's, overall, it's a good idea. The trouble right now is that we have these models of not just the corporation, but of all these things that are industrial age models and that need to change. And we need to rebuild them around these principles of open. You're not going to get another question here because we're over. Based on principles of collaboration and openness and sharing, interdependence, understanding that business can't succeed in a world that's failing, and also integrity, that you need to have integrity as part of your DNA or you'll be unable to build a successful company. So let me just end with that story that I wanted to tell you. It was years ago, Royal Caribbean was found to be systematically dumping oil and toxins into the sea. This is, you know, the big cruise line. This is a big problem when your marketing is all about the sea, the beauty of the sea. Come share the sea with us and this kind of stuff. So eventually it started getting spread around on networks, front page New York Times. They had to fire their CEO, or he had to resign. They brought in a new man, CEO, a man of great integrity. And he said, I'm not saying anything about the situation until I find out what really happened. So he spent a few weeks, talked to a lot of people, researched it, and he stood up before the world and he said, it's true. We've been dumping toxins into the sea. This is a violation of everything that we stand for as a company. It's a violation of what I stand for personally, and I'm here to tell you this will never happen again. 4 weeks later, Royal Caribbean is found to be systematically dumping oil and toxins into the sea. What's going on here? They had a value statement about accountability and sustainability. He's a man of great integrity. But they hadn't baked integrity into their DNA, into their systems, into their business processes, into their computer systems, into their compensation systems. The engineers on boats were being comped for cost control, and they found that they could save $400,000 a year by bypassing the pollution control devices in the boats, which got them bigger bonuses. And people do what you pay them to do. So Royal Caribbean had to go back and really dig deep and think about integrity not just being, you know, some kind of statement or a plaque on the wall in the boardroom, but as a set of values that needs to be deeply ingrained into their DNA and into their business process. They did that. Royal Caribbean's a great company today. It behaves really well. It's a leader in sustainability. It's a profitable company, but they deserve to be. And, but it was a great sort of case in point for me about, and it also points to why I'm really very optimistic, despite all the awful things that are happening in the world. This is an age now of transparency and where people can participate in ways that were unthinkable. You can not only read the encyclopedia, you can write one. You can not only join a political party, you can create a new a multi-stakeholder network that attempts to change the fabric of your company. And when I look at these networks that I've been talking about today, I see that this is a time of great opportunity. And I get very hopeful that this age of networked intelligence might be an age where promise is fulfilled and where the peril is sort of unrequited. So thank you very much for the conversation. We'll see you soon.